The previous basket is under review.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the Basket Under Review podcast. I am your host, Eamonn Brennan of Buzzer at EamonnBrennan.com, also of Basket Under Review, the home of the best and most in-depth college basketball content you will find anywhere in the world. Our guest today is one of the purveyors of said content. His name is Brian Geisinger. He's been doing and contributing some awesome breakdowns of particularly interesting ACC players to the site, how their coaches are going to use them, how the teams kind of revolve around them. And so we're going to talk about all that. We're going to talk about the ACC in general. Before we get to Brian and our full ACC breakdown, I want to encourage everyone to check out Basket Under Review. It really is a truly great website. And if you sign up, you get access to the site. You also get access to the Trilly Donovan Discord, where he breaks news, where there is a vibrant online college hoops community of thousands of paid subscribers, constantly chattering and talking about ball. So go check it out. If you do sign up, you support this show, you support everything everyone's doing at Basket Under Review. And so, I encourage everyone to take a look. Also, check out our sponsor, Homefield, the best athletics apparel retailer on the planet. Homefield's been crushing it throughout the first month of the college football season. They've been constantly releasing cool new stuff. As a frequent customer, long before any sponsorship situation came into my life, it's been cool to like sit on a podcast and tell people to go support a company that I have already prioritized and patronized frequently. It's not like one of those podcast ad reads where an underwear company sponsors a show and then the people are like, I love these underwear now. It's crazy how much I love the underwear now. It's just, I like Homefield. Homefield sponsors the show now. Very fortuitous. So thank you so much to Homefield for supporting our show. Okay, we've got Brian Geisinger. He's a college basketball writer, analyst. He contributes to 24/7 Sports, Swish Theory. He's also contributing now to Basket Under Review. He also co-hosts the BuzzBeat podcast. It's a podcast about the Charlotte Hornets, which I think is probably a labor of love. But we have him on the pod today to talk all things ACC, and I'm very excited to talk to him. As you guys may have noticed, I've sort of been sneakily working in some conference previews, maybe not so sneakily, in the past couple weeks. I had CJ Moore on 2 weeks ago to talk about the Big 12. We had John Fanta last week to talk about the Big East, but we also talked about, his origin story, his Fox internship where he lived in a hostel in LA for multiple months with a 60-year-old Nigerian man named George, and his parents getting divorced and all kinds of stuff. So I encourage folks to go check out that show. It was a long and very very fun one because Fanta is Fanta. But we're here with Brian this week to really sort of take a big, broad and super detailed measure of the ACC, and hopefully we live up to that premise. But Brian, thank you so much for being here. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I'm a little ashamed that I don't have some Homefield apparel on right now, considering it makes up roughly 30% of my dresser. But it's good to be here with you, and I'm excited to be doing a season preview that doesn't involve the Charlotte Hornets.
There you go. Really quickly before we start, I'm sure all the listeners will love to hear this. What's the deal with the Hornets this year?
I mean, I don't think they had a big draft night. College hoops fans will know, drafting Con Knippel with pick 4. Very excited about that. Liam McNeely out of UConn late in the first round, and then 2 early second round picks with Sion James and Ryan Kalkbrenner. I mean, in theory, if they're healthy, they should be better this season, but I still don't see them even like in a weaker Eastern Conference contending for a play-in or a playoff spot. And really, I think they should be gunning to try to get a top 4 pick again. Like they should have their eyes set on Cam Boozer, Darren Peterson, AJ DeBanza, like that's where these guys should be focused. But the team is moving in the right direction underneath new ownership, new front office, new coaching staff.
That's good to hear. I think the Hornets have always been an untapped portion of the NBA sort of suite of products, if we're going to call it that. Okay, so give me a little bit, like, as we did with John last week. I've followed your work for a long time. I've followed you on social media for a long time. I've always thought you've had really intelligent sort of things to say about the ACC. But give me a little bit on your origin story. Like,
Mhm.
how did you become um, a dialed in Carolina basketball, not North Carolina, just the state of Carolina, right? Sorry, to be perfectly clear about that. A basketball fan, observer, writer, all that good stuff. Because I feel like every time I have my college hoops list on Twitter open for the last however many years, I see something really smart that you're writing about the ACC or about Duke or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. And I mean, not to I won't give you the expanded universe, but just like I grew up in North Carolina, born and raised in Winston-Salem, and I know it's a little cliched, but there is a truth to it. Like if you grow up in this state and you like sports or, sports adjacent or whatever, you kind of pick a team and you get into it. And that was a good time when I was a kid to be like to be into the ACC and to be like a Wake Forest fan. And my dad worked at Wake Forest. We got season tickets when I was a kid. And just like the early to mid aughts for ACC basketball was incredible, even like pre-expansion. And the Skip Prosser, Chris Paul, Justin Gray, Eric Williams, like those teams ultimately broke your heart in the end after getting pitsnoggled in 2005. But incredibly fun times to be going to those games. And then, went to NC State for college. Wanted to work in sports media after school, and got after graduation got different internships, part-time jobs at sort of different local media concerns in the Research Triangle here. And again, it's one of those things like basketball was always my favorite sport. It's always the one I gravitated towards. And just like living in the Triangle, it's sort of the one with the most opportunities around. And yeah, I don't know. Like, not to say that like I like totally cribbed too much off guys like Zach Lowe or Luke Wynn, but when I was sort of like first getting in the game, there were different guys that I was really into who were writing about basketball in a way that I thought that really like appealed to me. Numbers friendly, talking about X and O's, that type of stuff. And what's cool is like there is a demand for it. And it was interesting, especially like in the mid 2010s, there was less of that. I feel like there's a lot of it now, and certainly with the NBA, the WNBA is growing in this regard too. But felt like the NBA coverage was pretty saturated, so it was fun, and it felt like there was an opportunity sort of to go for it, talking about college hoops and writing about it in a certain way, and just being in the area and having connections in local media. Could get credentials at Duke, could get credentials at NC State, could go to UNC games. And again, luckily there were just enough people to sort of like help me out and get different opportunities along the way. I used to do it full time for the ACC Sports Journal, based here in Raleigh. And then about 3 years ago, I had to leave that job, just for different. I mean, if you work in media, you know how these things go. But
Yep.
have been able to, on a part-time basis and freelance basis, continue to cover the league. And just it's one of those things too, where like each year one or two new things pops along that like makes you interested either to write about things, or it's sort of like a new outlet, like Basket Under Review coming along, that being a thing I could sort of like jump into this year. So like I've always loved ACC basketball. Like it was the first sport I fell in love with, and it's so cool to get to be around and cover games, and going to the ACC tournament is always a blast. And yeah, I'm just fortunate that there's enough people that are like interested in hiring someone to write like this, and that there are people that want to consume this. And I've also been able to sort of parlay it into getting to do some TV and radio like color analyst work as well, which has been fun, mostly covering like Big South basketball. So it's been
Right.
kind of cool to get to learn that league a little bit as well. Lots of great teams in the state of North Carolina for that. So yeah, that's the forgive me for going on about myself there.
No,
But
not
yeah,
at
that's
all.
sort of the origin and sort of the the origin for my interest in hoops and the ACC and kind of what the last few years have been like for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's cool. And I think you kind of mentioned the proliferation of websites like Basket Under Review and various other places, hopefully is meeting the demand that college basketball fans have, because I do think the demand is out there. And I think Zach Lowe and Luke Wynn are two great people to sort of identify with if there are any young writers. I know Luke's not writing anymore. He's in an NBA front office somewhere. But if people want to, I hope his stuff is still up at SI somewhere on like the archive or something, because, talk about an all-time great college basketball writer who covered literally every base you could want to cover in terms of understanding the sport and breaking it down for people, and is also just a very nice human being as well. So shout out to Luke. But so, okay, like the ACC, let's talk about the ACC. And we're going to dive into all the teams. We're going to get into the nitty gritty of previewing the conference. And like I said, I do expect you to push back on some of my tiers, or at least just tell me, I think this team's going to be better than you think, whatever. But you've been writing some really good, interesting college basketball or specific player previews, not just broad, like this team preview, whatever, like Marcus Burton, Lawal at Virginia Tech. You wrote about Malik Brown, and how these players are important, why they're important, how their team's going to deploy them this year. And so I wanted to ask you, and that's just for Basket Under Review, by the way. And I wanted to ask you who you think is the most interesting or maybe pivotal player in the ACC this year. Like, who is the one player you look at and think, if this guy hits his 95th percentile outcome, that changes the conference or the team or whatever?
Yeah, there were a lot of guys I considered for this. I think both of the Boozer brothers at Duke, Cam as like the best prospect in the league, who's going to be super productive. Caden as a guy who, is, I think, set up to be the go-to primary ball handler for Duke this season. I considered Michael Brown, just thinking about what he can do with the ball, what he can do in the pick and roll, and how much of a ceiling raiser that might be for Louisville. Ultimately, I decided between two guys. I was very interested in making a case for Darian Williams of NC State. However, the guy I've decided to go with is Pat Gongba at Duke as who I think is sort of like the most interesting player in the league, and a guy that I think could be really like a swing piece for Duke. I think he's going to be good this season. I think in minutes, when you saw him last season, especially that final third of the year when Malik Brown was injured and sort of like in and out of the lineup, and when Pat got to play a lot, he was really, really good. But for with Gongba, it always comes down to like health. Can he stay healthy? He's a guy that's dealt with injuries, during his time at Duke, going back to his prep time at PVI in outside of DC. But for me, the reason why I think he is so interesting is because he is, for a guy who is 6'11", 250 pounds, and is sort of like built seemingly like a back to the basket bruiser, he is so skilled, and he's got incredible feet. He's got great hands. He has fantastic shooting touch. He can pass. And if you watched Duke or studied Duke at all last season, you would know just how much Duke really like changed its half-court offense and really shifted around this 5-out approach, playing the center often at the wing. This is something that they sort of like got studied and developed via the Utah Jazz and Will Hardy, the team that spaces the floor in a very similar setup. There are some other teams in college who do this. There are a couple of teams in the NBA that go this route too. But Gongba is just like designed to be a really impactful 5-out hub, and a guy that you can throw the ball to, whether it's atop the key or on the wing. You can run all kinds of actions off of him, cutters off of him, split cuts, handoff actions, zoom actions. He can face up. I think he's got the ability to sort of like face up and attack guys off the dribble, just because of his footwork, his skill, and obviously his power. But if he is, again, if he sort of hits this 95th percentile outcome or better, Cam Boozer is going to be amazing this season for Duke. And I think there are some question marks in the guard room and and on the wing, sort of some uncertainty with Duke. But Gongba is a guy that just I think he has the chance to play himself into being maybe a back end of the lottery type pick. If he's this good, then all of a sudden Duke has two guys with Cam Boozer and Patrick Gongba that it can sort of like run its offense through. And I just think he's kind of the right guy at the right place at the right time to be, a hub for Duke in this new sort of like spacing concern that they trotted out last season. So I think there's a lot of guys you can make cases for, but for me, Gongba, I just think he has a very steady floor. I think you have a pretty good idea for sort of like what he can do, but he's also flirted, with developing a pick and pop three, and just sort of what he could be, both as like a piece for Duke next season and maybe even further down the line as his career extends beyond Durham. I think the foundation for that is going to be set this year. So I've got Gongba as my most interesting guy, and I think he's poised for a huge season. But I'm just fascinated to see how Duke is going to use him and how he and Cam Boozer really interact on the floor together.
Yeah, that's a good one. I had not considered him, but he is skilled enough for what you're talking about. I mean, and I think Duke is, I think, Rick Pitino essentially cited them as like, this is a team that didn't have a point guard last year. And I don't know that I necessarily agree with him as it relates to his own team, because they kind of did. I think Proctor was kind of their point guard, but also if you have Cooper Flagg in college basketball, you don't really need a point guard. He can just play point guard for you, and no one's going to call him a point guard, but he is. But they are, Duke is doing different stuff these days, and they started in earnest last year in terms of, I've said this before, but I think 2 years ago, Shire was kind of running the like NBA best practices playbook of just kind of like running the, what is the good stuff? It's the good stuff. Okay, we're going to do that. And it felt very like, yes, I've been to all the seminars, I get it. And this is the stuff that, yields the most efficient shots. And last year there was a bit more feel and a bit more like, hey, like we've got these guys who can do this, and the skills align here, and we're going to do this and this and this. And so it's interesting to hear you say that, because I don't know that he's a guy that tons of people have on the radar, but if, again, Shire does the same kind of stuff that he did last year, where he just kind of is a little bit more flowy with it, right? Then that makes sense. Okay, so that was my first big question. Second big question before we get into the ACC further in earnest: most interesting coaching situation in the ACC.
This is a really fun one to consider, because I am fascinated. To sort of like narrow the field down, like I sort of just like, to an extent, I put the first year guys to the side, even though like I am fascinated to see Ryan Odom at UVA. I've watched a lot of VCU film this offseason. I Will Wade and NC State play in my backyard. I'm fascinated by that. I can't wait to see Jay Lucas and Luke Laux at Miami and Florida State, respectively. John Shire at Duke is always interesting. There's a trio of guys. Or maybe like a quartet of guys who are some of my favorite coaches in the country, but also guys that to varying degrees are sort of like in the hunt or like needing breakthrough years. Steve Forbes at Wake Forest, Mike Young at Virginia Tech, Micah Shrewsbury at Notre Dame. Like, I really like these guys from like an X and O standpoint. I think they have really good ideas for development, roster construction. Steve Forbes is just like a cool guy. Mike Young seems like he's everyone's favorite guy. I've been able to ask these guys questions in press conferences, but ultimately I went with Hubert Davis from North Carolina. Look, I think the program has been largely successful under him. an ACC regular season title, and 2 seasons ago, they make the national title game his first year. But there have been some rough seasons. In 2023, they don't make the tournament. Last year, they barely make it. And it does sort of seem like Duke has, and these things, it always goes back and forth, but it does feel like Duke has sort of like edged them a little bit in recent years. And they went through a big overhaul this offseason. They brought in a new front office staff. They've got Jim Tanner in as a GM now. I'm really fascinated to see what the offense looks like post RJ Davis. I think you'll see Kyan Evans sort of in a lot of similar roles. But there was also some chatter out of Chapel Hill a few weeks ago that maybe the offense might look a little different. I'm curious to see what Henry Vezar, transferring from Arizona, like how Hubert Davis will deploy him. I'm really curious to see how Caleb Wilson works into things as, one of the most talented guys in the country this season, but just what does his role and fit look like? And then defensively under Hubert Davis, UNC, I think there's been some versatility in terms of they will switch ball screens at times, but for the most part, this is a team that plays this sort of kind of like no middle approach where you've got drop coverage. If they can push a ball handler to the right side, they're going to try to ice him on that side. If they can influence and force the guard to drive left to his weak hand, they're going to weak those ball screens. And I'm just kind of curious to see if there's a little bit more like versatility. I think that approach has largely worked for them. And I think it was huge for them 2 seasons ago when they basically built a top 10 defense in terms of adjusted efficiency without really having like a plus defender. I mean, Cormac Ryan, maybe the best defender on that team 2 seasons ago. And he was like a fine wing defender in college, but by no means like an ace stopper or anything like that. So I think they've had some success with it. At times it's felt like a little rigid and wobbly and like teams just kind of know what to expect. So I think there are a lot of big questions. And then when all of those things flow into the fact that like, it does feel like there's a little bit of unease and there's a little bit of pressure. I think some of the hires that have come from a resource and personnel standpoint this summer indicate that they spent a lot to put this roster together. Some unofficial numbers that have flown around have been large, and I think there's a lot of talent on this team, but by no means is it like a perfect or complete roster. So I've highlighted Davis, but seriously, there's like 8 guys you could pick that I would be pretty intrigued by this year.
Yeah, it's a very interesting conference for sort of pivotal coaching years and guys who probably are feeling like they need to, actualize this year. And guys like Will Wade who are in their first year, who are really under no pressure, but just have assembled interesting teams, and how will they maximize it? Maybe not. Hubert is, just a fascinating story in modern college basketball history, because he's a successor to a legend. Usually that doesn't go great, right? The handpicked guy almost never succeeds, but he took them to the Final Four in his first season, and
Year one, yeah.
It hasn't been terrible every year. They were a 1 seed a couple years ago. Like they've done some good stuff there. And then last year, with all the preseason hype and RJ Davis coming back, and RJ Davis just had a bad year. And I'm not sure how much to attribute that to Hubert and the staff versus just RJ not making the shots that you expect him to make. I think he got fewer clean looks, just in general, but I also just don't think he played like anywhere close to where he played the year prior. And so it's a tricky one, particularly because he's beloved. And I don't think there's a huge appetite for people at North Carolina, at least from what I've heard, to be like, run this guy out of town, like get him out of here. Like they will grumble and they'll be mad, right? And if they lose to NC State, they'll be furious, right? Like, fine. And this may be the year where the grumbles become like, okay, thank you, Hubert, we love you, but it's time to do something different. That's fine. But he's just kind of in a weird middle ground where he has had some success. He's had a couple bad years. People love him. There's not a huge appetite to get rid of him from like a cultural standpoint. But it's also a place that demands like we need to be in the Final Four or competing for it basically every year, and if we're not, then the coach isn't doing a good job, and it is what it is. So yeah, that'll be interesting to see. Okay, the one other big question I had for you is a state of the ACC understanding. I feel like a common topic for the last 5 years, maybe a little bit longer for me, particularly writing Bubble Watch and having people, the Pitt fans or whatever, who are like, we're 11-6. What are you talking about? We're 11-6 in the ACC. How are we not on the bubble? And it's just like, well, the league's not very good anymore. Like it's not, this isn't the 2005 ACC, or whatever year you want to pull out from that era, 2012 or whatever. And so I wonder if you have a take on kind of where the league is, whether it is, because it has not been itself as we sort of grew up with it, right? I don't know how old how old are you?
35.
35. Okay, I'm 40. I just turned 40 in August. So we grew up with the ACC as like, this is the best or second best conference in the country basically every year, right? And it just hasn't been that for the last like half decade. And I think last year was the first time where I would write that in Bubble Watch and people would not get mad. They would just be like, yeah, I know, it's not very good anymore, is it? But previous to that, there was like this pushback, like, and it, Duke and Carolina making deep tournament runs or winning national titles or whatever the case may be, gave people an argument of like, the net's dumb and the metrics are skewed and blah, 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 blah. And so I'm wondering if you have a theory of, where the ACC is, why it is where it is, and sort of the structural issues such as they exist.
Yeah, I think in many ways you and I are on a similar page. I was covering the league in the 2010s, and there was this really amazing stretch from like 2015 to 2019 where Duke won a title, UNC won a title, UVA won the title. And in 2017, they had 10 first round picks come out of the league that season. So 1/3 of the first round, which was a record at the time. And then 2 years later in 2019, led by Zion Williamson, the number one pick, they did the same thing that year. That to me is really when it was like, UVA won the title. They had multiple, that Duke team was the biggest story in the country that year with Zion. And that to me really felt like the last great stretch. And then just, the COVID years were a little foggy for the league as a whole. And then just the landscape shifted. And I would just say, like, I need a little more data, because while I do think there's been this sort of like gradual decline over maybe 4 years or so, last year was different and it felt bad, and it felt like bad in like an existential way.
It was bad.
But if that is like the nadir for the ACC, and assuming last year was the high water mark for the SEC, or the best that another league could potentially do, then I think there's a lot of like low hanging fruit to grab to course correct and just get like a larger sample to know that if the ACC is just going to be a like second tier conference from here on out, or if there's a chance for them to sort of like, get back into that upper echelon and usurp the Big Ten or the SEC or the Big 12 or whatever. And I think also too, the league as a whole was a little behind on adapting to the new landscape post 2021. I think leagues like the SEC, the Big Ten, which were already strong conferences, were able to sink a lot of money into roster development and different sort of like roster construction resources. And some of the league, I think, tried to adapt, but without really sort of like fully committing to the new approach with sort of this post NIL and more player movement. And I think you saw some of the league's like premier programs like really take a step back. UNC, UVA, Florida State. I think it's so easy to forget how awesome Florida State was like
For
in the 20
years. Yeah.
for years. In the last couple of years with Leonard, they were, I mean, before, at post 2021, those teams were like amazing in term with the Devin Vassell and Trent Forrest, Scotty Barnes. I mean, those were like elite basketball teams that were routinely a top, could be a number 3 seed or something like that. Um, and but also a program like Syracuse. Syracuse's time in the ACC has never been their sort of like their glory days. You've got to go further back than that. But obviously, it's been like a little uneasy, even sort of towards the end of Boeheim and at the start of the Red Autry era. And these were programs that, like, along with Duke, carried the banner for the league as a whole, like in the 2010s and the late 2010s. And I think Miami was able to initially find its footing again. They had some really good teams in 22 and 23, but with an older coach and Coach L, they just weren't able to, I guess it wasn't sustainable.
And they were early movers on the NIL too.
Yes, that was a
to
huge
their credit.
That was a big deal for them, especially in that 21-22 season. They were able to go out and retain some really good players and go out and get really good guys.
Nigel Pack for $400K, everybody lost it, and it
was a big deal. Yeah,
that's light work these days.
And I remember the dollar amounts to retain, Isaiah Wong, like that was considered a big deal at the time too. And they put together some unbelievably cool teams during that stretch, and then just sort of like obviously they backslid 2 years ago, and then last season the wheels just that totally fell off. There were some good programs with great coaches and good players, but I just don't think there was enough sort of like top down investment. Now you've got a place like Virginia Tech. They've committed more resources to hoops. That should really help Mike Young out. UNC, I was just talking about this a second ago. They've sunk a bunch of money into a front office. Wake Forest hired a GM this offseason. NC State brought in a totally new staff under Will Wade, and they went from having 0 GMs under Kevin Keatts to now they've got 2 GMs. They've got Andrew Slater, and they've got Patrick Stacy, the assistant GM, who's an analytics guy that they pulled in from Wyoming. These were things that weren't available to Kevin Keatts for whatever reason. And now all of a sudden they have just the school, the boosters, whomever, they have just committed that kind of money. And then unfortunately there was a program like Louisville that has the money, that has insane resources, but they just whiffed on a coaching hire. And like that stuff can happen. You hired Kenny Payne, and it's weird to me because like I think Chris Mack is a really, really good coach. And it's like there's some reality where like that guy, like if something like COVID never happens, like Chris Mack is still the coach at Louisville and is in, year 8 now and has gone to the Final Four or whatever. It's kind of funny that he and Pat Kelsey, who've known each other for a long time, those guys have basically flipped places. And Louisville's in a great spot now, but just like there's some other timeline where like Mack at Louisville's a huge success, and you don't also lose these 2 years with Kenny Payne. So like I think some of it was hires. I think ultimately, though, it has helped because the league, a lot of programs are now committing more money, more resources, hiring more personnel. And then I just think with some of the other hires that you've seen, across the landscape, Kyle Smith at Stanford. I like Micah Shrewsbury at Notre Dame. I think Jay Lucas, Luke Laux have a lot of potential down in Florida. So my hope is that there's a chance to sort of like right the ship. But certainly last season was concerning. And again, it was like I knew a lot of people like in and around the state, ACC alums, fans who were like legitimately concerned and confused why things had sort of like gotten so rotten. So we'll see how it goes this year. I don't think it can be worse than it was a season ago. And that was even with Duke being, by some metrics, the best team in the country, right? I mean, they led the nation in adjusted, efficiency, but certainly there wasn't the depth behind them, in terms of second, third, and fourth tier.
No, yeah, there wasn't. And like I said, it was, it's this weird thing where you're like, the 5th best team in the ACC like 4 years ago or whatever. Like, yeah, the fifth best team in the ACC is like maybe not going to make the tournament. And people are like, what are you talking about? Like, how can that be the case? And then last year was, I feel like, the first time where even ACC fans were like, like, you're right. Like, we're not very good. Duke's awesome, but everybody else is bad. And we have kind of lost the plot in terms of like formerly reliably good programs, Virginia being a great example, are just not there.
I wanted to just quickly like highlight Virginia again. I mean, they really became like the third like blue chip program in the league. And
100%.
under Bennett, they were a machine in the 2010s. And they were, in my estimation, they were one of the best player development programs in the country. They had an identity on both sides of the floor, and they were awesome. So, obviously the last few years under Bennett, they were a struggle. There was obviously a lot of sort of wonkiness around his retirement, at this point, I guess like just under a year ago, which is like hard to believe. But I do think they're like the needle is pointing in the right direction. I don't know if they'll ever get back to the heights under Bennett, because like they were just like as good of a product as you could probably have. That wasn't like a true blue blood. But
yeah, and that the system in which he developed that program and those players just does not exist anymore.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that he ran into. Like he the whole point to him was like, if I'm going to coach, I want to do it in, like he has said this in numerous interviews and to me and other people, right? Like his whole idea, his whole thesis of coaching was very classical. It was very, I'm going to run this system. It may not be pretty, but this is what we're going to run. And we're going to play defense like crazy. And we're going to get guys, and some of the freshmen are going to redshirt. And then by the time they're juniors and seniors, they're going to be awesome. And that was the idea. And it worked incredibly well for like a decade. And then NIL and the portal, like immediate eligibility happened. And suddenly the guys that would redshirt or would, play a few minutes as a freshman and then get on the floor as a sophomore, and then junior and senior year, like, oh my God, London Parantis is like the best player in the country. That just didn't happen anymore. The guys just left. Like they left because they got better offers or more playing time or whatever the case may be. And so then you're in the position where you have to go chase talent and bring guys in. And suddenly you're trying to get juniors and seniors to understand the concepts that you used to teach these guys when they were 18 before they were even playing. And it just, you can understand the structural reasons why it just didn't work anymore. And I think he probably, he gave it a genuinely good go for 3-4 years and was just like, all right, this is not an environment that's conducive to what I wanted to do when I came to this program. It's just not going to work anymore. And I'm not the right guy to do it. And, we'll give Ron a year and then Virginia can do what it wants to do. And I do think, and we're going to get into the conference. So let's just do it now. We'll start with Virginia just because we're on them, and then we'll go down the list. But I think Virginia is a really interesting situation because obviously they hired Ryan Odom, who was on this podcast 3 weeks ago. And I talked to him a lot about sort of trying to bridge the divide of, you have a lot of people, a lot of fans who were very, very, what's the right word for it? Sort of invested in the way Virginia did stuff. And you have to get these people on board with, you came in, you're a new coach, and you have 13 new players, and it's a totally new thing. And he talked about, the program going out of its way to like do a documentary about all the new guys and try to make sure fans see and understand their new players. But it's a very interesting thing of like, they hired a person who has ties to Virginia, grew up in Charlottesville and all that good stuff, but also I think threaded the needle on, you have to be willing to be flexible and adaptable in the modern era. Right. And that's kind of where I think they made a really good hire, because I think that that is what you have to do. That's Ryan Odom. And I think he's kind of perfectly placed as a guy who loves Virginia, but also a guy who's like, we can refresh the roster every year if we need to. We'll figure it out. Like we'll make it work with what we have. We don't have to recruit to our system.
Yeah, they went out and got their guy. I mean, it was pretty obvious he was
Slam
a
dunk
top,
hire.
yeah,
Like
slam dunk hire. I live in Raleigh. I cover state. I know NC State people were intrigued by him too, but obviously he was a Virginia guy, and it makes so much sense. If you've watched his teams at UMBC or Utah State or VCU, like guy's been building winners, all across the country for the better part of a decade now.
he really has.
And
He really
like
has. Everywhere he goes, those teams immediately get better, and like 2 years later,
when
like, okay,
and,
Ryan Odom's gonna get hired somewhere else.
and it's gonna be funny too, because it's like I think there's gonna be some similarities and certainly some differences in ways. Like I think Odom's teams, they do play like it's like conventional, but like in a more modern way. Like it's a pretty like analytics. I totally don't know like where he is in terms of like, paying attention to those types of things. I just sort of know like the sort of like profile of his teams on both sides of the court.
Right.
Virginia guarding ball screens. The last couple of years under Bennett and under Sanchez, they were not like these sort of like hard hedge every ball screen that they had been, in like sort of like peak Bennett times. But this is a team that you're going to see, I think, in way more in deep drop coverage, take away the paint, try to take away the rim, try to take away, staying out of rotation, cutting down on kick out threes. That's that sort of like more like numbers driven or analytic friendly approach on the defensive side of the floor. And then offensively, like I don't know if it's more for me, it's a little bit more difficult to put like an identity on them because it was VCU was super versatile last season and like great movement sets, good ball screen sets, pistol action with some of their really good guards getting into early offense. And that's something that like, Bennett would do with Kihei Clark and Reese Beekman. But I just think in an approach that just like stylistically really not only like is it sort of like numbers friendly and gives you the possibility to like build a roster out that has the chance to like be competitive, but is maybe a little bit more like plug and play in a sense too.
Yeah.
And then just also like it's crazy to look out on this roster, and we're in year one of a rebuild, and I think you're going to see a lot more talent flow in under Odom. But just like compare the ball handling talent on this season's roster to where they were a couple of seasons ago. Like you will not find like a larger Reese Beekman fan than myself. I walked past him in Las Vegas during Summer League, and I was starstruck. He's my guy. But he had to be the guard, the ball handler for them for so many years. Or you were trying to, force it on a veteran, Kihei Clark, to really carry a larger load than he had earlier in his career. But you look out now, and Malik Thomas, outstanding player and bucket getter that they brought in from San Francisco, Dallin Hall, Jakari White, Chance Mallory, the freshman. All of a sudden they've got like a lot of ball handling talent on the roster, and that's really exciting, I think, to play in Odom's system on both sides of the court, where you've got a very like detail-oriented, balanced offense that things make a lot of sense, and defensively press, probably a lot of like full court press, different looks out of that, and then falling back into this deep drop coverage and using some of the the freshman bigs, especially Johan Grunlow, to be guys that I've seen enough of him to know that I really, really like him a lot. I'm not sure he's like a crazy rim protector. I think he was hovering around a 5% block rate this past season in Europe, but a guy that I think can at least, credibly try to like anchor a defense. So I think they've got some pieces in place to fit into this system. I'm very excited to see what it actually looks like, but I think it's going to be a good product this year for UVA.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they pushed the boat out, so to speak, to acquire as much talent as possible in his first year. And I think there was a lot of pent up demand to do that for Virginia basketball. And Tony just didn't play in that playground, it kind of didn't want to, unless he absolutely had to. And so, yeah, it's going to be a fascinating thing. All right. So we're going to do the tiers now. I'm going to introduce my tiers, and I'm just going to go down the list. National title contenders: Duke, Louisville.
Mm-hmm.
We'll come back to this. Okay. We'll come back to this. Tier 2, talented, but questionable: UNC, Virginia, NC State, Miami.
The only one I think I would push back on that one is I just need to see it with Miami. I need to see it.
We're gonna get to it. We're gonna get to it.
Yeah.
Program mode, which is a term that we coined on the podcast. I can't even remember who was on, but it's just like, you just gotta trust the program, right? Like, just trust the coach, trust the program. I've got SMU and Clemson in there. Is this finally the year? Tier 4, Syracuse and Notre Dame. League strength pivot teams, where the league is actually going to be made in terms of tournament bids. Even if these teams don't get tournament bids, them being good will, potentially push other teams on. Pitt, Wake Forest, Virginia Tech. The other tier, the next tier here is two teams that can't believe I wrote this. Two teams that remain totally real ACC members and might actually be okay, at least in Cal's case. Stanford and Cal. Okay, that's the last tier. No, wait, one more tier. No clue. Florida State, Georgia Tech, Boston College. Okay, so that's the whole league as I have it in tiers. We're going to start at the top. We already kind of talked about Duke a little bit, but let's talk about Louisville, because I love this team. I love the roster. Speaking of Virginia and their past couple of years, Isaac McNeely is, I think he's like their third best transfer or second best transfer.
Yeah.
And the guy shot like 300 threes last year. That's a slight exaggeration. It was like 200 something. And made 44% or whatever. He's like a career 42% 3-point shooter. And so many of those shots at Virginia were challenged coming off screens, like Rip Hamilton, like baseline, like, pin downs and stuff, and not the ideal situation. He just buried shots all the time. And I think McNeely is an incredible player. But I think the Louisville situation is interesting because, as a neutral, I'm going to love that team. I think they were mentioned on Will and Jim's podcast in the middle of last week as like a league pass team, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what they are. But if you're a Louisville fan, there might be a night where you lose like 92-85 to Wake Forest or whomever. That might annoy you. I don't know.
Yeah.
But because I don't think they're going to be very good defensively. But I do think they're going to be so good offensively that if they can be like, let's say 55th to 65th, 70th in adjusted defensive efficiency, then you got a chance to win a title there.
Yeah, they have all the tools for this to be like a top 5, top 10 offense in efficiency. It's crazy how many different weapons they have. You mentioned McNeely. This guy, I mean, he will go down. He's going to end his career at Louisville, but like, he will go down as like the last great movement shooter of the Bennett era, right?
He's unbelievable. I watched a lot of those games last year, and they were bad.
Yep.
And it's just like the guy, two people flying at him coming off a screen because they know he's not going to pass and like dump it in, and he buries it anyway.
It's funny too because like Ron mixed in some different stuff last year, but they also just did a lot of like blocker mover in the year 2025, and like I kind of loved it, but it was just amazing to see IMAX as Tony Bennett used to like to call him just like flying off these flare screens and down screens, getting 2 on the ball and just still pop in. He's a ridiculous lights out movement shooter. So is Ryan Conwell, who they brought in from Xavier. And so they've got he's left-handed. They've got a righty and a lefty, these two guys that can just come flying off of screens. And if you've watched Pat Kelsey, whether it was at Charleston this past year at Louisville, think about all the ways he used Ryan Smith, right? Like how all the actions they had with him flying off of screening actions. And then I think one of the best things that Kelsey does is he is so good at involving his best shooter as a screener and then using that guy to help get north south in the half court. Like for me, when I close my eyes and think of Louisville's half court offense last season, it's Chucky Hepburn, like stack pick and roll or Spain pick and roll, whatever you want to call it. James Scott's diving downhill to the rim. You got Ryan Smith setting the back pick and then popping out beyond the arc. And like they ate off that. And I think those guys, the shooters, Conwell and McNeely, are going to be incredible for helping open the floor in different ways for Michael Brown Jr. and Adrian Woolley, who I think is just going to be was one of the most like fun guys to sort of like study this offseason. He was incredible as a freshman at Kennesaw State, another southpaw, can shoot it some, but got great size, really like clever driver, manipulative, can really pass. And then I didn't see any of Michael Brown until probably the Hoop Summit in Portland. But then I watched him a lot this summer, and I watched every second he played with Team USA at FIBA U19. And like, you could make a case he was the best player in that tournament. Like he was incredible. And I think he takes some wacky shots. If you watched him play at DME last season, he takes some tough shots, but he's an incredible shooter, both off movement, off down screens. He's a glider coming off ball screens, an all floor kind of passer, both hit heads in transition or in the ball screen, being able to read the low man and make skip passes or kickouts. Just stuff is set up for him to have a monster season. That's why he was in consideration for me for like most interesting guy in the ACC. I think Javon Hadley, who went under the radar for how good he was, both at Colorado when I first watched him and then at Louisville last season, just a great mismatch piece. And a guy that I think is also going to be really helpful for Brown, because they can just do Brown Hadley pick and roll, or they can invert it and have Brown set a ball screen for Hadley. And if they get a switch, Hadley's going to go to those Barkley style back down drives, and he's going to get in the paint, he's going to get layups, he's going to get hook shots, he's going to get fouls, he's going to get kickouts, all of that stuff. And like that just the stuff we mentioned is enough for like an awesome offense. But then you can mix in some of their other guys like Ali Khalifa, who's a guy that I think when he was at UNC Charlotte, like really showed off some fun, like high post, handoff hub, passing abilities.
I love Ali Khalifa.
Yeah, he's
such a fun player.
College hoops nerd. It's been a while since I've like seen him like be like a featured guy, but he's in much better shape now. And I think he's a guy that like can give you some of the high post and elbow facilitation that Scott did last season. That was a big piece of Louisville's success. I also kind of like Kahani Ruths a decent amount too. I liked him when he was at IMG. My one concern for them on the offensive side is like, I would like to see someone in that 5 rotation emerge as like a rim runner and a lob guy, because I think that's going to be a big piece to like really get Brown going in the pick and roll, and to like for Louisville's offense to like really hit its ceiling.
That's not going to be Ali Khalifa.
It's certainly not going to be, and that was why like them
I don't know if Ali Khalifa can dunk.
It's for a 6'11" guy, it's like it's debatable. It's borderline. Like it's right on the fence there. Obviously, Scott was an amazing. I think he may have been second in the league last season in dunks behind Malawach, but just an incredible, it was like maybe my favorite center in the country last season, like in terms of sort of like, guys that still returned this year, but obviously he's not at Louisville. So that is a big loss on both sides of the floor. If he was back, I think this team still has like Final Four potential, but like I'm worried about the center rotation just a little bit. But the guards and wings, it's ridiculous. They've got everything you could possibly want.
Yeah, I feel like my putting them into the tier with Duke as a potential national title contender is purely based on, I just feel like we're in a place with college basketball now where you can, if you're a top 5 offense and like 50th defensively, you have a chance to just like burn your way to the Final Four. You know what I mean? Like you can just bury people for a few rounds, and it doesn't always work out. And you can get the inverse of like what St. John's had last year, where they're so good defensively, but they can't shoot. and they are living on mid ranges all
Mhm.
day, and then you play a really talented athletic team like Arkansas and you just can't score. But I feel like there's a potential for Louisville if they can just be like solid, decent
Mhm.
defensively, that it's a potentially like really, really good offensive team, like putting up Alabama level numbers, which would be fun to watch. Okay, so we talked about Duke at the top of the show or close to the top of the show. How good do you think Carlos Boozer is? Or not Carlos Boozer, his son.
The which of the sons, Cam or Caden?
It's a
They're
well,
both
let's just
very
talk
good.
about let's talk about both.
Yeah,
Like
I think
are
they're
we
both.
we're not in flag territory, right?
Mhm.
But are we in like best player on a number 1 seed territory?
I think so. I mean, I've seen a lot of Cam before arriving at Duke, and I saw him. I went to the open practice last month too. His shooting touch from every level of the court, his footwork, his strength. He's a very clever passer at 6'9", 240 pounds, 6'10", 240, like whatever they're listing him at. But a
Right.
fluid athlete with outstanding hands, outstanding feet, and a great feel for the game, and just like is a like cash money shooter. Like you look at his shot charts and it's comical. Like it's literally every spot on the floor like lights green. And I don't think he's going to give them the sort of like, I mean, Flag was obviously just like a one of a kind sort of like two-way player,
One of
and
one.
obviously
He's one of one.
in his decision making and his passing was just, it was absurd. I was at every home game last season for Duke, and it was just like comical watching him work. And so I don't think Boozer's going to give them like quite that level of playmaking, but I think he's going to in like sort of like defensive playmaking too. But like I think offensively they're going to put the ball in his hands a lot, and you're going to see him operating in spots that are similar to Flag, in the middle of the court, 5 out. But I think you're also going to see them put him in the role, some of the stuff that they did with Con Knipple last season, where he's going to be coming off of down screens out of the corner. And it's going to be really powerful if that's Pat Gongba or Malik Brown setting the down screen for Cam Boozer, and you've got a 6'10" movement shooter curling off the screen, and you've got a guy in Gongba with great hands, great feel, great finisher, dive bombing to the hoop. So I think Cam's going to be the best player in the league this season. I feel of the sort of like big three that are emerging for the 2026 draft, along with Boozer, Peterson, and Debansa, like I'm very bullish on Cam. And then Caden is a guy that like I was probably like I sort of like got on board with him maybe a little bit later than some of the guys I know and trust who cover preps ball. Like I know some people that thought he was the top guard in this freshman class, like would have put him above Brown or Acuff. I don't know if I would get quite there yet, but when I saw him play at their open practice back in the first week of August, he was incredible. I think he may have been the best player on the floor in that game. And he can really pass. He's strong. He can drive. He's got a great feel for the game. Defensively, he can do a lot of different stuff. For me, it just comes down to like where's his shot, because I think that's going to be a determining factor in terms of like how teams guard Duke. And depending on like how useful he is in the pick and roll, like that's going to depend on how sort of like Duke sets up its menu of options offensively. Because I think right now Duke has the chance to be this like incredible offense that initiates a lot from the high post. Because you've got Gongba, Cam Boozer, you've got Malik Brown, you got Nick Kamenia who can also really pass and facilitate as a freshman forward. But for Boozer, or I guess Caleb Foster, there's really an opportunity to sort of like grab the point guard spot. And I think a guy like Caden Boozer, I think he's had a really good offseason coming into Duke. I think he showed up ready to play day one. And I think he's set up to have a really good season. So he's not the same caliber of prospect. They're different players too. But I think both the Boozer brothers are going to be phenomenal for Duke this season with Cam I think sort of like solidifying himself as a top, 4 or 5 draft pick too.
It bodes well. It bodes well for Duke, as it often does. Okay, next tier. Talented, questionable. UNC. We talked about UNC a lot. We're not going to talk about Virginia here because we completely dissected them. But the one thing I want to ask you about, I feel like there's some discussion in the UNC world where it's like Seth Trimble is the star. He's like the guy at UNC. He bought a Ben and Jerry's on Franklin Street with his NIL money, which is kind of cool and a flex. Like, also probably smart. He'll probably reap a small monthly profit off of that store for as long as he lives. But am I missing the boat on Seth Trimble? Like, what am I not seeing about Seth Trimble that is like, this guy is the best player on Carolina's team this year? I'm like, I think he was fine. I don't think he was like that good.
I think he's been a nice role player for a couple of years, and I think that's totally fine for him, right?
Right.
I think he's been a solid guard defender for a smaller, 6'3", probably 6'2", 6'3" guard. He's a great
he
athlete.
does good stuff. Don't get me wrong. Like, he does good stuff.
Good player. Like, I think he was a big part of their like transition and secondary game last season. And he's like a pretty like artful finisher around the basket for a guy his size. The lack of, he's just not like a great shooter. And I just think like the sort of like live ball playmaking like isn't, just hasn't come online with him. So like the guards that like I'm really, the playmakers that I'm really expecting for them this season are Evans, Wilson, and Luka Bagavac coming in from Europe. Like, I think those are. Forgive me if I butchered his last name.
Oh, well, I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but everybody loves that guy.
He's great size. I've watched I think two of his two full games of his now too. Like, manipulative, can shoot it. Is going to move backline defenders around and pass to the open guy. And then Evans isn't like, in terms of like size, he's not like a burner and he's not like an amazing like interior finisher, but an incredible like, like a sniper from beyond the arc. And I think a guy that they're going to use, like, you're going to see Evans in a lot of the sort of like RJ Davis packages is sort of like my thought. And then Wilson is whether he's 6'7" or 6'10", is a great, forward with athleticism who can really, really pass, especially more like open floor. I think he'll be a big, transition piece for them this season. And I think Vazar is a guy that they're going to need to like initiate 5-out stuff with this season. So just like, I think Vazar can help open the floor for Trimble, because if Vazar really is like a pick and pop guy, or at least a 5 that they're going to facilitate with from the high post, that opens up cutting lanes and driving lanes for a guy like Trimble. But I think there's a chance that like Seth comes off the bench for them. Like, I think there's a good chance. Like, I could definitely see a lineup that's like Evans, Luka, Wilson, Vazar, and Stevenson or something like that. Like, I think there's a chance that like Trimble, I think there's a very good chance that he starts or whatever. But all of a sudden, if you're putting, where do Wilson and Vazar land as shooters too? And then what does that do for your spacing if you've got 2 or 3 guys out there that can't really space the floor? And if one of them is a guard like Trimble, we saw what Alabama did to them in the NCAA tournament 2 years ago with Trimble and Cadeau. How basically they could put a 5 on those guys and have Grant Nelson just sit in the paint and not guard them. That was an extreme version of that, but we saw Shire and Duke have flirted with those approaches too. We've seen Steve Forbes in Wake Forest flirt with that. So like, I just think you've got to be a little bit careful sort of in terms of like what your lineups look like, unless Trimble just like, is a guy that he's made a leap as a shooter, in which case then I think, some of these sort of like lineup fit concerns, can go away.
If he's shooting the ball, then great.
But short of that, I think he's going to be a nice player for them regardless. I think he's going to be like a, something between like a star and a role player, like a solid, contributor, you know what I mean? But I don't see him as being having this sort of like next level ceiling to get to. I could be wrong though.
Okay. All right. Next one in that tier is NC State. Will Wade, baby. He came in, he spent a bunch of money. He honestly, recruiting players is one thing, recruiting money is another thing, and he has done both, and done it really, really well. And I am obsessed with Darian Williams. I think he's one of the best players in college basketball. But outside of Darian, um, what do you make of how this actual roster is going to fit and how Will is going to use it? Because one of the things that I've been talking about this offseason with him is that I think he flashed at McNeese development as a coach, as a sort of tactics X's and O's guy, and a strategic guy, more than he had when he was at VCU and LSU. And maybe people think that's wrong. I don't know, but I just feel like I used to watch those LSU teams, particularly when they were really good on offense, and it was just like, yeah, guys, go score. Don't worry about it. Like, it's fine. Go get a bucket. It's fine. Go get an 18-footer. Like, we have pros. It's fine. And I think at McNeese, obviously, for most of their season, they were more talented than the teams they played. But when they played more talented teams, they did smart, interesting stuff that elevated them even above where their talent was.
Yeah, I think this is the biggest win that Wade had last season, McNeese upsets Clemson in the first round. They just throw that curveball right at the start of the game.
Junk,
where they
just pure junk.
Matchup zone, beautiful. And you could just see Brad Brunell and Clemson staff, which had this ornate, beautiful offense all season, just wanting to like break stuff because they were just, and until there were 10 minutes left in that game, they were just like thrown for a loop. This is a team that also we talked about a few minutes ago. They brought in Andrew Slater, who was with the OKC Thunder, very like analytics friendly program. They brought in Patrick Stacy from Wyoming, who's a guy that has worked in college hoops analytics for a long time now. And then one of the assistant coaches that they brought in, one of the guys that is not coming from McNeese State, is Adam Howard, that's been the last couple of seasons on Fred Hoiberg's staff at Nebraska. And he is, from what I had been told, was the guy that is like sort of like the architect of State's offense and is bringing some of these sort of like 5-out spacing shooting concepts that Nebraska has built very good offenses the last couple of years.
Yeah, Nebraska runs really good stuff offensively, and
so this is a team that just like you were talking about, like they recruited players, they've recruited money, they've recruited like a totally new like analytical approach to the setup here at in NC State, which is really interesting to see. The talent on this roster is super interesting. There's a lot of like playmakers on the roster. You mentioned Williams is just like one of the best creators in the country. I am still like amazed he's here. Like to me, it's like kind of crazy that they have a guy this good. Like this, the inverted pick and rolls are going to be popping every other time down the court. But to get a veteran creator like Trey Holloman, to get a guy like Quadir Copeland, who's not much of a shooter at this point, but is a guy that can beat up different matchups, is a great open floor passer and player. To retain a guy like Paul McNeil is really interesting because McNeil basically like could not get on the court for most of last season under Keats. But when he played, State was just better. I mean, it's sort of like small sample theater, but his shooting, his passing, he's like a sneaky good offensive rebounder for a guard, really juiced the numbers when he was on the court last season. And you'll not be surprised to know that this new staff saw that. And that's a reason why they targeted Paul McNeil Jr. beyond just his like talent to be a guy to come back and play for them. But he's a guy with his ability to he's got a cannon for a jumper. And so you think about all the movement sets you've seen Nebraska run the last couple of seasons, and thinking about how you can copy and paste Paul McNeil into some of those roles. Terrence Arsenault is a great two-way wing, good athlete, good defender, been a part of a great winning culture at Houston. I think Jerry Dang, like in like the stretch four role, whether he's backing up Darian Williams or they're playing together in sort of hybrid lineups, he's a guy that brings size, length, and shooting. I covered him at FSU last season. And then bringing in Matthew Abel, too, is one of the sort of like three freshmen that have come into the team this year. But Abel's a guy that was a big-time recruit, had a great summer, played at the Donovan Mitchell camp, the the Dame Lillard camp, was a part of the trials for Team USA for the U19 FIBA, but is a guy that I think has really turned a lot of heads with his work ethic and his skills, and a guy that's I think going to be a scoring piece for them on the wing this season. So just to think about how hard it was for State to like get its half court offense going last year.
Yeah.
And to compare that to where they are now, where they have all these different guys that can handle it, all these different guys that can space, that can pass. And then you've got sort of a guy like an Adam Howard who's going to come in here and, blend his concepts with what Will Wade wants to do on that side of the court. And there's a chance for this to be a really good 2A team. And then defensively, they're going to switch a lot. Like they're going to switch 1 through 5. They're going to press. They're going to double the post. And there's the chance for maybe this not to be like an elite defensive team, but one that speeds up opponents and creates a lot of turnovers too.
Right. Yeah. And Williams is huge for that because he can guard a bunch of guys and can move around the floor. And, if you've got him even on a center, he's wide enough that you're not necessarily giving a ton up. NC State's going to be fun. I'm really excited to see, for a program that has, obviously they had the Final Four run and they had, like they've had some success, but it's a super passionate fan base. And I know Will Wade is going to like juice that thing to the maximum. So it's going to be fun to watch. Okay. Miami is the next team that I had on this tier. And it might be a slightly hot take. Am I crazy for having Miami this high? Maybe I'm doing the thing where I watched a lot of Malik Reneau at Indiana and just feel like he's a really good college basketball player. Even though he doesn't, he's like a conventional college basketball player, but I don't think he was always super well used by the coaches that he had. Mike Woodson, namely. And, I just think there's a lot of talent there, a lot of production. And, if you're starting from there and with some of the other guys they have, I feel like Miami has a chance to be pretty good.
I think so too. I mean, I think they're going to be, just given how bad they were last season, I think, Miami and State project as like the two, most improved teams.
Yeah. And if you want to boost the conference, if you can get those teams into like tournament contention.
Yeah. It's like Miami was so bad come conference play last. It was a mess.
Terrible 2 years in a row. I mean, the Larinagas last year, it
was bad. It was so bad. I agree with I've liked Reneau since his freshman season. It's cool that he's still around. It's cool that he's found his way to the ACC. Agree. He just does a lot of like stuff that you would want like a big guy to do in college hoops, like score in the post, rebound, can give you some facilitation, like toughness, like all of it. Trey Donaldson, veteran guard, previously of Michigan. I like him to sort of like be a floor general for them.
I like Donaldson as well. That's a good player to have. Like for a first year coach coming in the portal, like it's a good setup.
Good freshman class that came into sort of headlined by Sheldon Henderson, who was a Duke commit. Was recruited to Duke by Jay Lucas, and then Lucas sort of left near the end of the season to take the Miami job. And Henderson followed suit not too long after that. So he's he's an excellent prospect and a guy that I think has the chance to be like a dog on the wing for Miami. And Lucas, as you know, super good recruiter, young, well liked by a lot of different people, can connect with young players, and was a guy that I was integral in coordinating Duke's defense the previous 3 seasons too. And if you watch Duke defensively, they were probably better on the offensive side of the floor, but they were always quite good on that side. And a team that mixed it up in terms of guarding the pick and roll, that did a lot of different stuff, would ask the centers to do a lot, would mix it up between drop coverage, leaking ball screens, switching 1 through 5, playing up at the level, hard hedging, trapping, blitzing, whatever. So I'm excited to see what Miami's defense is going to look like and sort of how Henderson is featured within that. So I think I would probably have them down. I don't know quite where this feels like a tier, a slightly too rich for them, but There's
That's
talent on
fair.
this roster, and I like Lucas a lot. I think he's going to be a good coach. So like, I think there's a chance for this team to like reliably land in this spot, going forward. I just need to see it to sort of like believe it a little bit more. And I know NC State turned a lot of pieces over, but it's a lot of like returning veteran players, so it's a little bit easier to like sort of like project and sort of like see how those things are gonna interact compared to a team that still has 4 or 5 freshmen coming in plus a 36-year-old first year head coach.
Yeah, fair enough. That's fair. Maybe they go down into the league strength pivot teams type
Yeah,
of situation. But I'm
fair.
just high on Miami. I'll
Yep.
put it out there. That's fine. All right, next tier program mode. I've got SMU in there. I've got Clemson in there. SMU, obviously they've got Boopy back. But I just think Andy Enfield is kind of in the zone right now where he just produces top 40 to top 50 adjusted efficiency teams every year. And they either win the games they need to get in the tournament or they don't.
Hmm. Yeah, they were like I mean, I think I don't know if they quite outperformed expectations from like a statistical standpoint last season, but from like a vibe standpoint, they were like a really solid team a year ago, and having Boopy come in and be a guy who could, initiate the offense was a really good look for them, and playing him with guys like Edwards and Cross was a big boost for them, and having him back, Miller, probably the fastest guy in the conference, end to end with the ball in his hands. Not like an amazing pull up shooter, but a pretty good pull up shooter. And with his speed, it's like enough for him to be like really, really, really destructive. And bringing back guys like Edwards and Aquendo on the wing, bringing back the big guy Cement Yekatoglu, who's a guy who, a lot of drop coverage last season, but showed some versatility guarding ball screens up at the level, and just like an interior finisher too, a guy that can give them some post scoring. Was like a solid young five for them last season. Plus, they bring in a pretty good freshman class with Toombs, Walls, and O'Neal Jr. So there's a lot to like here, and I think they're in a good. This is a good spot for them to be from like a program and sort of like tiers within the league.
Yep. Okay, next one is Clemson. There was a moment where it looked like Ian Shefflin might get a waiver. Not really. It was never going to happen, but it was fun to contemplate. But Dylan Hunter has a chance to be really good. I think the transfer from Nevada, Nick
Davidson, yeah,
is a really interesting portal pickup in kind of a low key Clemson way. Like he works for them and what Brad Brownell wants to do. What do you make of Clemson?
Yeah, just to piggyback off what you said, like Davidson is a like copy and paste Clemson big guy. Like
Yep.
he's mobile, he's skilled. If you put on his Nevada tape, you're going to see him facilitating from the post, low post, the high post, 5 out, picking pops into drives. And his ability to play both sides of the high low, either to be the guy up top who's trying to like, weave in the entry pass, or the guy that's like ducking in and sealing in the paint, and then looking to finish. He can do both sides of that. And like, this is a nerd thing to say, but Clemson is like one of the premier like high-low offenses in the country, both in their half-court sets and their secondary actions. My biggest concern for them is just going to be like the guard creation. You lose Jaden Zachary, you lose Chase Hunter, who was at Clemson for a million years, and in his
Really
sixth
good player.
season, he was awesome. I mean, I think he and Hepburn, those were the two best sort of like one point guards in the league last season. He was outstanding, and I like Dylan Hunter a lot. And I think last season he sort of like evolved and developed into becoming a really solid rotation guard in the ACC. So we'll see if he's ready to sort of like make the next step player development wise and be a guy that can sort of like lead them and give them some shooting and some scoring. I like the front court room a lot, led by Davidson. I'm just a little worried about the sort of like the amount of like guard creation that this team has compared to the last couple of years for Clemson.
Yeah, and I'm giving them some credit because I think they lost PJ Hall last year and ended up having an even better year than
Mm-hmm.
tournament performance aside, than they did the previous year, and so maybe that's triggering the program mode thoughts here. But They do have some serious holes, particularly in the front court, as you or in the back court. Pardon me, as you mentioned. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. I mean, I think I say this about Brad Brownell, but he has had some years where they haven't been great. They've finished in the 80s, 90s, whatever. They're usually fine in those years. It's not like they never take like a horrible, like, oh my God, this team was 170th in adjusted efficiency type of step back. But they do have years where they're down and they're just never in the tournament conversation. So that could happen this year. We'll see how it goes. All right. Is this finally the year tier? Syracuse and Notre Dame are the two teams I have here. Syracuse, obviously, they bring back Starling and George. Nate Kings with a Z. That's a great name.
Kings.
Big fan of that name.
Yeah.
Big Nate Kings.
Yeah.
But the real question for me here is, how good is Kyan Anthony? Because I feel like that's the Syracuse like cultural vibe fan thing, and that's super fun. But how good is this player actually?
Yeah, I need to see a little more of him, and I need to see more of him at the college against like college talent. I've seen a couple of his games, including his performance at the Hoop Summit back in April in Portland. He can score for sure, but I'm just not sure like how efficiently he can do it. And I'm not sure like where his like sort of like go-to spots on the floor are going to be. And I am a little interested to see like what the fit between Freeman and Anthony. Donnie Freeman, returns as probably one of the more talented guys in the ACC. We'll see if he can stay healthy and fully break out. But I see he and Anthony being guys that sort of like want to operate in similar areas on the court. I don't know if this is the year they totally break through, but like I will say, I was impressed with what Starling did last season. I thought he had a really nice year, and like looks like he's gotten like a little bit more burst, a little bit more wiggle to his game offensively. Nate George was a nice player at Georgia Tech the last couple of seasons, like starter level, ACC caliber guard, nice piece to have. You brought up Nate Kings, like a knockdown shooter in from Oregon State. And then I think a guy like Freeman has the chance to be like a sort of like a breakout year 2 guy for them. And White and Anthony are two really talented freshmen that have come in at the wing spot. So I wish they had I'd like to sort of like know what the front court rotation is going to look like in terms of like, I guess Ibrahim Soare is going to be playing a lot of 5 for them this season, but I'm a little curious to sort of like know where they go from that. I was excited. I thought last year was the chance for them to sort of like be a breakout team, and that did not come to fruition for a variety of reasons. But like, I think Red Autry is a pretty good coach. This is a program that has invested money in analytics. They've invested money in a general manager. Like, I think they've got some nice sort of like staffing personnel pieces in place. And there's some talent on the roster too. To me, I feel like they're going to be like just on the outside looking in. But I like a lot of what they have. And if Freeman like really makes the jump and just becomes sort of like a go-to one-on-one scorer for them, then they could be a tough team to stop, especially if guys like Starling makes another step, and you've got Anthony is maybe better than I'm sort of projecting him to be too. So I like it. I just don't totally buy it.
Right. Okay. Next one here is Notre Dame. Obviously, Marcus Burton. You wrote a great piece for Basket Under Review about how awesome of a player he is. Just plays like every minute of every game, scores a ton of points, creates a ton of points for teammates. But how do they go from, oh yeah, nice team with a really good player, to this team should be in the tournament?
They need, first off, they need Burton and Braden Shrewsbury to stay healthy. Like, those guys each missed 7 games last season. And there was no overlap, and they really struggled in those games without Burton. Offensively, it was really tough anytime they weren't playing a like sub 200 team. They're super reliant on him. I'd love for them to find sort of like more ways to sort of like lighten the load for him, and to sort of like be better in the minutes with him off the court. They brought in a big recruiting class this season. But Burton's awesome, and he's like kind of unguardable at times.
He is 100% unguardable.
He's super fast. He's an elite mid-range scorer, and he's not like a bad three-point shooter either, So it's like he hits you from different levels. He's super quick. He's unselfish, and he's got a battery pack attached to his back. Like he just keeps going. Shrewsbury returns, I think, is sort of like he's not in the like Isaac McNeely, Ryan Conwell tier of like movement shooters, but he's probably not that far, the Isaiah Evans tier of movement shooters in the ACC, but he's not too far out of that. And a guy that offensively, they're very creative using him to come off screens. They use him in a lot of like ghost screen actions where he will sprint in the direction of Marcus Burton and then sort of like blur out in the other direction. They did that with him and Tay Davis a lot last season. So I'm a little worried about them not having Davis, who was sort of like the one guy that could create outside of Burton. They ran a lot of inverted actions with him, and he's a very talented and very like productive offensive player for them. He's gone, I believe he's at TCU now. So I'm kind of curious to see sort of like how good Jalen Harrelson is. I saw a little bit of him 2 summers ago with Team USA at the U18. But they need him to do a lot. Like they need him to be a guy that can play off of Burton, play off of Shrewsbury, can help get those guys open, and then also be like a sort of like a mismatch guy in the front court for them that can attack switches and can attack different cross matches, that kind of stuff. So I like this team a lot. I think Keba Njai is like a solid, kind of like under the radar starting 5 in the league. Had a really nice season last year. Flirted with a 3-pointer a little bit too. But ultimately, this is going to come down to, I think, like Burton and Shrewsbury staying healthy and what Notre Dame can do to sort of like supplement Burton's playmaking, whether he's on the floor or on the bench.
Yeah, and look, it's a big year for Micah Shrewsbury. Like he, I think, is extremely well regarded in college basketball circles. Like everybody respects him, thinks he's a really good coach, and it hasn't gotten there quite yet. And I think Notre Dame basketball fans are relatively patient. But there comes a time where you have to put it on the floor and make it happen. So, they're in that mode right now. Okay. League strength pivot teams is the next tier. This is maybe not the best worded headline, but
I like it.
But I've got Pitt, Wake Forest, and Virginia Tech here. Maybe we can just throw Stanford and Cal in this tier because that was kind of a jokey tier that I made about the ACC, including those teams now. So let's do all 5 of these kind of at once, rapid fire style. But like, Pitt, like I just someone please tell me what to think about Pitt. I don't know what to think about Pitt. I have no pre-existing notion of whether or not they're going to be good.
I'm a little worried because I like Jeff Capel. He's a good dude.
He's really done some good stuff at Pitt.
Really
too.
good dude.
They've done some good stuff.
And I think it's unfortunate that last year did not go that they sort of fell apart down the stretch, because that's a team that probably each of the last 2 seasons in 24 and then again in 25, there was a lot of talent on the roster.
I previewed them pretty high this time last year, if I remember correctly. I was pretty high on Pitt.
Like them a lot. I'm a little worried with how much talent has departed. Basically, all of their rotation guys outside of Cam Corrin, who's really good, had really, really, really nice season for them last year. That's all gone. I mean, Jalen Lowe's at Kentucky. The Diaz-Graham brothers are back they're on the west. They're out on the West Coast now. Ish Leggett is gone. Zach Austin is in the pros now. Was one of the sort of best athletes and wing defenders in the ACC the last couple of years. And so just I like Brandon Cummings. I like what I saw from him during parts of his freshman season, but just I'm a little worried with what the half court offense is going to look like for this team, and they're really going to need big production out of Minor and Cummings, in the guard room. Those guys are really going to have to be key pieces for them. I will say with Corrin and then with Jackson, who transferred in, this is they're not going to be fun to play against, I don't think, because they've got 2 bruisers in the front court that are tough, great size, great strength, great physicality. So I could see them sort of like leaning into that being their identity, like toughness, rebounds, that kind of stuff. But I'm a little worried about the offense for Capes.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think I feel like every time I think Pitt's going to be good, they're not as good as I thought, and every time I write them off, they are stronger, middle of the league. Much more solid than I thought they were going to be. So we'll see. Okay, next one on the list, Wake Forest. It sounds like you have a particular interest in Wake Forest. So why don't you just tell me about them?
Yeah, so I've sort of grown out of my phase of being a Wake fan, but I do sort of like want them to. I prefer for them to be good, and
this is like me with Indiana. I
Yeah.
don't root for Indiana, but I have like an emotional connection because I have friends who went to Indiana.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who Wake Forest basketball matters a lot to them, right? And
Right.
like Wake was my entry point into the sport. So like I'll always have a soft spot for them. And like if you haven't had the chance to like meet him or talk to him, like Steve Forbes is cool. He is a cool
yeah, he's
guy.
the man.
He's
Yeah.
he's fun,
Iowa
he's
native
charismatic.
Steve Forbes, by the way.
He's awesome. And like the people on the guys, it's not just him. Like there's a lot of guys on the staff there that are super personable, like good dudes who I genuinely like want to see them succeed. I'm a little worried with sort of like what the playmaking apparatus looks like for them offensively. Like I like Nate Cummings. I've watched a fair amount of him at Washington State this past year, but like to replace guys like Hunter Salas and Cam Hildreth, like Wake wasn't like a great half court offense last season, and that was with them having guys like Hildreth and Salas that could really like do damage in the and be scorers and facilitators in the front court room for them. So I like Cal Meese. He's a guy that can like super shifty, really good at rejecting screens and getting downhill, can shoot it and can pass it a little bit. So like he's in line to have, a big season for them. But I'm curious to sort of like see where he lands from that perspective. I like Juke Harris a lot, who I think had like kind of a, not like spectacular, but really solid freshman year, like can rebound, can guard different positions, can pass, knows how to play without the ball. Like I'm pretty bullish on him as a multi-year guy. Omaha Blue, who transferred in from Iowa State 2 years ago, dealt with injuries and then was just sort of like stuck behind Efton Reed and Trayvon Spillers last season. But he's a guy that has talent, has athleticism, has a great, basketball body. And then the piece that I think is sort of like maybe most intriguing for them is Kubert Schweiger, who transferred, the 6'10" big that transferred in from Valpo, gives them some stretch, gives them a little bit of playmaking, can really shoot from a bunch of different levels on the floor. 57% true shooting last year. He was not afraid to shoot threes. And with his size and his ability to shoot it from different levels and facilitate, I think like they're just gonna have to try to build the offense out of like him plus Cal Meese, like as like a duo in the pick and roll. I think bringing in Miles Colvin from Purdue is like an interesting like upside play too. We've seen Steve Forbes has found under the radar guys, guards and wings who were in sort of like lower usage roles, whether it was Salas or Alondas Williams, and he's plucked those guys and brought them in and just like has empowered them to go out and be like really like play to their ceiling on the offensive side of the floor with a higher usage role too. So like maybe Colvin is some grasp for that as well. And then Mekhi Mason is was a solid player in the Big Ten for Washington last season too. So like I'm a little again similar to some of these other teams we talked about. I'm a little worried offensively. Sort of like I think there's an identity with Schweiger and Cal Meese, but like I'm a little worried about some of the supplementary pieces. And then just like, I will be interested to see how they set up their defense this season. Steve Forbes has primarily been like a drop coverage guy in terms of guarding pick and roll. Last season, I wrote about it a bunch. You could tell they scrapped it. They played some drop, but mostly they had Efton Reed hard hedge and play up at the level. So I'm curious to sort of see like how they're going to orient the defense this year too.
Cool. Okay, next team, Virginia Tech. Mike Young, again, a pivotal year in many ways. You wrote a really interesting piece about Tubby Lawal, who might be the most athletic player in the country. and he's fun. But Virginia Tech, I think, when I think of Mike Young's teams, and maybe this is not entirely correct, and please correct me if it's wrong. When I think of Mike Young teams, I think of really well run stuff, good spacing, perimeter shooting, and Lawal, if he's like the cherry on top of that baseline, sounds great. But if that's like the go to, then you may be in a difficult position just tactically speaking. So where do you land on how this Tech roster looks? Because again, like we said, this is I think a pretty big year for Mike Young.
It's a huge year for Young. I think the roster is in a much better place than it was a season ago. For sure, it felt like things had kind of gone sideways for them.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a team that won the ACC in 22, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, like when I think of Mike Young, close my eyes, it's like it's machine like offense, right? And they've always been like a rhythm offensive team. I've heard Steve Forbes talk about how Wake would change up their game plans to when they would match up with Virginia Tech and Mike Young because he wants to throw off the rhythm of them. And I think that's certainly like going to be a big piece for them again this season. Super creative offense with a lot of like motion. I've never liked the one thing, if I could like gripe a little bit, I've never liked that like Young has always been a team. Virginia Tech under Young has almost always guarded pick and roll with the 5 up at the level. And I just feel like they're always in rotation defensively, and they've never quite had like the athletes to like really make up for that. It was once, when you had Justin Mutz a couple of years ago closing everything down and putting out fires, you could kind of get away with it. It's a little bit different. Now, I've been a fan of Ben Hammond since he was at PVI in high school, but I think he had some good moments his freshman season as a sort of like smaller point guard. I'm very, very, very excited to see Neoklis Avdalis, who comes in from Greece and has the chance to be one of the more talented players in the ACC, guard or wing, however you want to list him, but 6'8", who he can slash, he can get into the paint, he can create with or without a ball screen. He's versatile, he can really pass, he maps the floor, he sees it. So I think he's the chance to maybe be like sort of like a talent raiser for them on that side of the court. And then you still have all of the sort of like fun motion Mike Young stuff that we've seen for decades now across his time at Wofford and at Virginia Tech. So this is a team that I sort of like always has a soft spot for me. I really like Mike Young. I'd like for his teams to succeed and do well. And Avdalis, like I am fascinated by him. And I'm sort of excited to watch a little bit more of his tape before the season actually comes around. So, I'm not sure if there's enough here for them to fully make the jump unless Lawal's talent, his athleticism are great. He shot it well from deep on a small sample last year. And he feels like a guy who doesn't give you like quite as much impact defensively comparatively to his athleticism and size. So we'll see. Like if he sort of like puts it all together this season and becomes like a lights out help defender and then like proves that yes, he can also be a spot up guy and shoot in the mid to high 30s plus give them the play finishing, then all of a sudden they've got a real talent in the front court room and a guy that can produce at the kind of level that they need. But maybe that's a big if.
Yeah, it's an if for sure. Very interesting season in Blacksburg. We'll see how that goes. Okay. Next one on the list is Stanford. I love Kyle Smith. I think he has overachieved with pretty much every team he's ever had, basically in Division I basketball. If you go back and look at any team he had, whether it's at Washington State, before that, like they're always better than you think they're going to be before the season starts. But they did lose a lot of guys in the portal. They lost important players, Stojakovic chief among them. Can we do a kind of mini program mode here for Kyle Smith? Like, are you as high on him as I am? Because their roster doesn't look to me like it should be a tournament contention, top 60. Maybe you win a game in February or March that puts you in the bubble discussion kind of team. But he has vastly overachieved, in my view, his talent at pretty much like almost every part of his career thus far.
He's an awesome coach. Awesome coach. Did great work at San Francisco, great work at Wazoo. I think he's going to do a good job at Stanford. I don't think this is going to be the year they bust through, though.
There we go.
To lose a player like Maxime Reynaud, who he was so good last year.
He was, yeah. I should have mentioned him as well. Yeah, Reynaud was awesome.
Insanely skilled. I don't know if he was like a legit like 5-out hub in terms of like his passing. His passing was pretty good, but his pick and pop, the shooting, the catch and goes, the posting up against mismatches, all of the handoff actions, like he and Jalen Blakes, who transferred in from Duke, those guys turned into a really nice like 1-5 pick and pop battery pick and roll duo. It's cool that there's a lot of like returning players. Agarwal's back, Akpara's back, Gieler's back, Young is back, Kamen's back, Thompson's back, Stinson's back. It's a lot of dudes from last season. I'm just not sure I see like Agarwal, like he's got some potential on the wing. Same with Akpara. I'm just not sure I see the sort of like scoring capabilities and sort of like to me, I think it's gonna be tough for this team to like create advantages in the half court. They're really gonna have to like scheme stuff up. And I am curious to see like what the offense looks like without Reynaud, sort of like what they turn to. But I think they're going to probably take a step back on that side of the floor, and I don't think there's enough sort of like defensive impact to really like get this team over the hump. But they had a big recruiting win the other day with Elijah Wan's kid committing to Stanford. So I think brighter days are on the horizon, and it would be cool to see Stanford get back to being like a reliable winner. I think Smith is a great fit for their long term. I just don't see it in year 2.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should have had Cal ahead of them. Although I'm seeing, as I look at the roster just now, they have Day Ames playing guard, which doesn't fill me with a lot of confidence because I've seen Day Ames play a couple of years in college basketball now. All due respect to Day Ames, please don't get mad. No family members send a text message or a DM about this, but he's had a checkered, in terms of productivity anyway, college basketball career. But anyway, what do you make of Cal? I think, again, coaching wise, in a great spot. And also, as a corollary, do you feel strange talking about Stanford and Cal in your beloved ACC? This is weird. I still can't get past this.
It is different. There's no doubt about it. It was like they both play. I covered games where Cal and Stanford were both on the East Coast last season, like in North Carolina, playing along Tobacco Road, and it was definitely different. I really enjoyed talking to Mark Madsen, Cal's coach, after the game in Durham. Super like intense, passionate guy, but was happy to answer my nerdy basketball questions. I think losing Stojakovic, that's tough. Obviously, losing Jeremiah Wilkerson to UGA, that was a tough one because like they were. I remember talking to Madsen after the game last season. You could tell like they were really like betting on Wilkerson being like an offensive like go-to guy for them. He had a really nice freshman year. As far as like guys, there's still like talent here though. Like they bring in Chris Bell from Syracuse. Last season was a down year for him, but 6'7", movement shooter. You've got Rytis Petritis, who's probably one of the sort of like better like all around wings in the ACC, like kind of a fringe, pro prospect, good player at Air Force that came in, had a nice season at Cal last year. And then John Camden is pretty interesting too, a guy that started his career at Memphis, spent time at Virginia Tech, and then had a monster season at Delaware last year. Shot it well from everywhere on the court, 40+% from deep. So I like some of the stuff that's here, and Ames I think gives them, he's not my cup of tea either, but he gives them some speed and some north-south driving ability. And then with a guy like Lee Dort, you've got just a brick wall guarding the rim. Cal they are like the Milwaukee Bucks in terms of like how they play deep drop coverage, or they're sort of like how Creighton would do with Ryan Kalkbrenner. Like they keep the 5 glued to the rim, And so they can be like tricky to match up with at times. So because of that, that's a thing to sort of like have to game plan for. So I like some of the pieces. I think they've got some good wings with Botrytis, Camden, and Bell. But yeah, I still think this is going to take a few more years to sort of like to break through. So look, I love the Bay Area. I'll say this: I've had some great times. I've not spent a lot of time in the East Bay where Berkeley is, but I spent a lot of time in SF and some time in Oakland too. So love it out there. Would love to cover some games out there, but glad to have them part of the mix. But yeah, it's still weird for sure.
Yeah. Also, I need to issue a correction. I just realized when you said that at the top of the Cal segment that Stojakovic played at Stanford and then Cal. And transferred from Cal to Illinois. Yep. So I'm going to issue that correction live on the podcast, and Corey, our producer, can decide whether to just delete the entire just keep it in. It's fine. My brain is old and bad. Okay, the last three teams we have for the ACC to discuss, and then we'll let you go, and we'll get through them real quick here. Florida State, Georgia Tech, Boston College. Now, it sounded like you have Florida State when we talked to the top of the show, maybe a little bit more interesting than these other two teams. So let's just run through all three real quick.
Yeah, just starting with FSU, like Luke Laux was a really interesting hire. I mean, he makes a ton of sense. Like it's crazy. I can like still remember him playing at FSU. I think like when I was in college as well. But a guy who spent the last decade with the Warriors and the Kings and was Sacramento's defensive coordinator. Now the Kings were never a defensive, juggernaut during the time there, but that was a little bit more personnel related than it was maybe in terms of
that's always scheme. Hard to that's always hard to gauge. Like
But I think the
NBA is so talent dependent. Like you can't really, anyway.
And just like if you have this is a silly digression, but just like if you have someone like Domas Sabonis, who's an amazing, top 25 player in the world, but like is a center that can't really protect the rim, then you have to sort of like scheme weirdly. You have to do different stuff. So if anything, I give Laux some credit for trying to like craft up a scheme that would fit his best player. They've got Chauncey Wiggins who transferred in from Clemson. I've always kind of liked him as like a 3-and-D, 6'10" wing who can shoot it a little bit. I don't know if he'll ever fully put it all the way together, but I've had my eye on him since his freshman year at Clemson. And then I don't want to mispronounce this guy's name either, but LeJay Jones, who transferred in from St. Bonaventure. They poached him from Woj up at St. Bonaventure, but like 6'7" wing lefty can do a lot of different stuff. Shot it pretty well last season, and he's like sort of like a sneak like really talented incoming player for them too. So I'm just intrigued to see. Like I want to see what Laux is doing from a scheme perspective, and I like some of the pieces on the wing that he's brought in. Damon Stoudemire and Georgia Tech,
So hold on real quick. I just want to confirm. You've got Florida State higher up the tiers than this, right? Am I wrong or is this right?
No, I would probably, let's see, this tier. No, I think this is fair for them. From like I can't get them, like they're not, unfortunately they're not in program mode. They're not in this year finally the year, and I just don't see them as like a pivot team yet. So to me, I think this is like I do think this is the right spot for them. But like let's talk about them more in 12 months. You know what I mean? We just have more information.
Thank you for hewing to and respecting my completely ridiculous tiers that I came up with in like 10 minutes. Anyway, okay, Georgia Tech.
I'm all about order. I'm happy to follow the guidelines here.
I like that.
I think Damon Stoudemire is like a good coach, and
agree.
I've liked some of the stuff that they've done the first two seasons underneath him. I think he's actually brought in some good players. Hasn't quite worked out as you might like to see. I thought they had the chance to be better last season. They really missed Miles Kelly, who ended up had a good season for Auburn. I like Jaden Mustaf, the sophomore, guard wing for them. I thought he had a nice freshman season, like super strong, competitive, can defend a little bit. Baye Dongo he's one of the best, front court guys in the league, period. And he's a junior. I believe he'll turn 23 in January. Like he's older for a junior, but really athletic and can guard different positions, can do different stuff guarding the pick and roll. Super athletic, great play finisher, and he's got some sort of like playmaking potential for them too. So like I really like Dongo a lot. He's had some huge games for them. I just don't see this being offensively. I'm really worried about this team this season, even though I like some of the stuff that Stoudemire runs. I'm curious to see what guys like Washington and Kraft can do for them offensively. Like those guys are going to be kind of important. And they also brought in, I believe, Chaz Kelly the third, who was a sort of like rotation guy at Boston College the last couple of years. So I don't know, maybe he sort of like finds a larger offensive role. But to me, Dongo and Mustaf is like a pretty good top two guys. But if the league is better, I just don't see them having like sort of like the high level talent to really like bolster this, or really like the depth to sort of like raise the floor altogether.
Sure.
And then last but maybe
Boston
least,
College. What are we
Boston
going to do about
College.
Boston College?
I don't know, man. I like Donald
They may
Hand.
not be that bad. They may not be that bad.
I think Earl Grant is like he was an interesting hire for that role. They've had some decent teams. I really liked what they did when they had Quentin Post. Thought they did a nice job sort of like orienting themselves around his sort of like flat out stretch and playmaking. Donald Hale Jr. is going to be one of the better sort of like guard wings in the league this season. Aiden Shaw's an interesting piece that they brought in from Missouri. Like has been a really like, is a very talented like athlete in the front court room. Similarly, like I'm not sure I see them building a top 100 defense here. And unless Hand is like ready to go up like multiple levels, he's a really good player and like I think a guy that has some sort of like fringe, NBA prospect considerations.
Yeah.
And his dad was awesome too. But like I just don't. I'm not seeing it, and that's going to be tough for Earl Grant this season because this is in theory this is a big season for him. I just don't see the talent offensively or up and down the roster to really like boost this team, up multiple tiers to sort of like get into bubble consideration.
Yeah, no, but I mean, look, if Boston College ends up being the worst team in this league, and Bart has them at like 105th to start, in his preseason projections, we'll see, what Ken Palm comes out with, whatever. But like, if to as we close, to go back to the broader ACC discussion, if your worst team in the league is around the 100 mark, you're now in a much better place in terms of the overall league strength, which has been an issue for the ACC in the past few years. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. I mean, I think there, as we discussed, there are a ton of schools in this league that have fascinating kind of transitional coaching seasons, or potentially could lead to transitions in the coaching and front office of the basketball the men's basketball programs at those schools. So we'll see how it goes, but I think we covered it. I think we pretty much ran the rule over the entire ACC. So Brian, we're going to close it there. Tell people where they can find your work.
Yeah, you can find me. I'm on Twitter at bgeis_bird. I'm on Blue Sky at Brian Geisinger as well. And I contribute in a lot of different places. Certainly Basket Under Review. I'm hoping to have a few more things up there before the start of the season, and obviously going into the season. My own Substack page, which I have titled Split the Action, and is just briangeisinger.substack.com. All kinds of nerdy basketball coverage there. Basically the same thing as what I'm doing at a place like Basket Under Review. And I'm also covering places, teams like NC State and Duke for 247 Sports. So you can find me at any of those places. Certainly find me. I'm always tweeting out numbers and clips and links from my social media accounts. And yeah, looking forward to college hoops coming up quickly. Thank you for having me on. I know I talked a lot here, so thank you for your patience.
It's great. It's
fun.
No, it was great. It was super in depth, and that's what we were going for. And like I said at the top, I really have followed and read your work and leaned on it for ACC insights for a long time now. So it's great to have you on the show, and great to talk to you.
One more thing I would say is I'm hoping to be more active in the Discord too once the season starts as well.
There you go.
It was,
get in there.
I went in there for the first time a few months ago, and it was if you're not like seriously, if you're not subscribed to that and you like college hoops, like I was blowing it. It was like discovering a new solar system. Like it was just at the end of 2001 Space Odyssey, just like staring into the next galaxy. So I'm hoping to be more involved with posting over there once the year starts as well.
Oh yeah, no, it's a whole solar system of sickos over there. So check out the Discord, sign up to the website, check out all of Brian's work. Thank you for listening. Thank you to our producer Corey Aldis, who's gonna cut out the Stojakovic mix up on my part and probably make everyone sound better and smarter. Thank you to I want to add this to the end of the podcast. Thank you to Sam Freyer, who does all the graphics for the website and does the graphics for the podcast. He does a fantastic job and makes everything look super professional. Thank you to everyone at Basket Under Review. Thank you to Homefield. And that's our show. Thank you, Brian. We'll talk to you soon.